Hello and welcome back to our weekly Sermonette. This week is the Torah portion of Mahar Bechukosai. It is the Torah portions that conclude the third book of the Torah. It's called Shabbos Chazak, where we conclude a Torah portion. It's a Shabbos that we gain strength. Every Shabbos we gain strength for the week to come, but on a Shabbos Chazak it's even greater that we get much more strength. So hopefully we can get some strength from the thoughts that we share here today into our day-to-day lives. You know, this past week was Lag BaOmer. It was so great to see so many people come out to our event, to our drive-through. And I have to tell you on a personal note, you know, the one day of the week that was literally threatening all-day showers was this past Tuesday. So much so that I actually kept a snapshot of the weather at 1:45. Our entertainers, they were coming from out of the city and they were going to drive to come here to Memphis to help us with the event. And the guy sends me a picture of the weather, which it says that between 5 and 6 o'clock, it's between 90 and 100% chance of showers. Do you still want us to come? And we decided, you know what, everybody's going to be in their cars, so they'll just have to use their windshield wipers. We set up tents for the entertainers and to distribute the arts and crafts and various different things that we had to distribute. But lo and behold, around 3:30, when we went out to set up, there was a break in the weather, and then the skies cleared, and until 7 p.m. for the whole time event, there wasn't a cloud in the sky, and we had a beautiful weather turnout. So we need to offer what we call Hakara Satova, recognition of the good that God does. I believe you partner with God. You do, we have to do what we have to do, and God takes care of what He has to do, and we have to appreciate it when we recognize. And it was so great to see so many people come out, to be able to see you guys live, not just over electronic Zoom and the various different things, and to see such a cross-section of the community come out to celebrate something Jewish, that hopefully we'll be able to celebrate even more things, even closer and better in very, very soon. As we've been doing the last few weeks, because it's the time of the time period of the Omer, a time that we're supposed to improve our character, we're focusing on character improvement. I'm reminded of a joke. They tell the story about this new rabbi that came to town. He really didn't know the people very well, and he had to officiate at a funeral. And it comes to the funeral, and he says, you know, that it would be beautiful. You know, we're supposed to eulogize. And they were standing there at the funeral, he says, you know, we won't bury this person. You know, before we bury this person, we would like to have somebody come up and say some kind words about the deceased. And silence. Nobody comes up. So he says, really, you know, you have to be able to have somebody come up and say something nice about the individual. And he says, in my tradition, we don't bury until somebody that gives a eulogy, and still silence. And he realizes he got into an awkward situation. And he says, he puts down hard, he says, I will not continue with the funeral, and we will stay here until somebody comes up and says something nice about this individual, where one person from the back yells out, his brother was worse. And with that, the rabbi says, okay, let's go. What I'd like to talk about today, our discussion, is it's based on, there's a Mishnah where it tells us that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai sent out his students to travel the world and come back and share what is a good value that we should live by. What is a good value with what can be a foundation of having a positive life. And the story is told that his student, Rabbi Elazar ben Hyrcanus, came back, and he says that the best thing that he's traveled, he's seen everything, and the best thing he came across was ayin tov, a good eye. When he says a good eye, it doesn't just mean physically that you have a good, healthy, physical eye, or that you have 20/20 vision. There's something deeper here that we're talking about. What we're talking about is to see the good in everything. Because what we see depends on what we're really looking for. And I'd like to share a story that I think brings out this story. The story recently surfaced where this fellow told the story about himself. He was not connected very strongly to Chabad. He was not from Chabad circles, but he had an opportunity many years ago to go to visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe for a blessing. And he had a private audience with the Rebbe. And he met with the Rebbe and he spoke to the Rebbe about whatever he had to talk and ask for a blessing. But then he told the Rebbe that he had also a dilemma about a statement in the Talmud. The Talmud says a statement, and it says, Poshe Yisrael Malaya Mitzvahs Karimin, that even the sinners of Israel are full of good deeds like a pomegranate. And he says, I don't understand. How could it be? If they're sinners of Israel, how could they be full of good deeds and full of mitzvot when the Torah calls them sinners? And he says that the Rebbe got serious. The Rebbe bowed his head down a little bit and he noticed a tear form in the Rebbe's eyes. And the Rebbe tells him, that statement has been troubling me as well. My question that I have about that statement is that if they're full of good deeds, like the seeds of a pomegranate, how can the Torah call them sinners? Basically, it's more than just the question on the text. What we're talking here is about the people in this conversation and how they view another person. Am I looking at them as sinners, or am I looking at them people that are full of mitzvos and full of good deeds? What we spoke about in last week is, we all have a natural bias. We all have a natural bias, and what we see in others is really what we are looking for. A great mistake that people make is that they think that the eye sees. It's not the eye that sees. The eye is a lens that transmits, but it's the brain that sees. The brain is really what sees. And what the brain sees, once the image is transmitted through the lens, depends on what the brain has been affected. Because the brain is affected based on our feelings, based on our memories, and based on what our experiences in life and what we've seen before. That depends on what the brain will see. So in other words, what we see is affected by our default lens and bias. So how do we get a good eye? The way we get a good eye is by changing our bias. Changing how we think, how we feel, and how we want to look at another person. So in other words, what we see is affected by our default lens and bias. And when we could change that, we can see differently in others. This is the essence of what we call a good eye. A good eye means, if a person wants to have a good eye, means you have to change into what I'm calling here a positivity bias. You have to look at the positive, find the good in another, find the good in the world, find the good in circumstances. Then what we're looking for is what we will actually see. Now, I understand that this is attainable, this is feasible, this is something we can work on, and something we can accomplish, for someone that is neutral, for someone, situations that are good. But the question is, how do we recast or redeem someone who made their negative pretension or intolerance very, very, very clear? So I'd like to share another story. When I grew up in New York, I grew up down the block from Chabad Lubavitch World Headquarters, spent many, many years there. And during the high holiday season, the whole month of Tishrei, there was this photographer that used to come from Israel. His name was Levi Yitzchak Frieden. And this is before everybody walked around with a camera and a cell phone. And he would really record literally the whole month's experience. The serious times, the joyous times, the spiritual times. He captured the moments of the experience of having the holidays with the Rebbe, with the Chabad movement, the hustle bustle on the street. And he did this for 2 decades. And after 2 decades, it was in 1976, he decided when he went back to Israel to have an exhibit of this. And he called the exhibit 770, which is the address of Chabad Lubavitch World Headquarters. And he had this in Tel Aviv. It was at the Tel Aviv Journalist Center, which is called Beit Sokolov. Also had it at the Bar Ilan University. And many, many people from all different backgrounds came to see this. And he had a guest book for people to sign when they visited. And people wrote how wonderful the exhibit was, how it moved them, etc. One particular guest signed the guest book, and he wrote them, he says, although the photography is amazing, and it really, great talent of the photographer, he said, but the subject that you have chosen for this exhibit takes us back to the primitive darkness of the Middle Ages. Can't always get positive feedback. That was the feeling of this individual. Anyways, long story short, this photographer happened to be, whether it was the next year, I'm not sure, he came to visit the Rebbe, and he came and gave a report to the Rebbe about the exhibit, and he brought the guest book with him. The Rebbe flipped through the guest book to see the comments and happened upon this entry into the guest book, and the Rebbe read it, and the Rebbe said to this photographer, Levi Yitzchak Frieden, he says, please compliment this journalist on his strength of character, because it takes fortitude to differ from all others. The Rebbe didn't look at his negative comment. The Rebbe noticed that this is a person who's not just going with the flow and going to tell people what they want to hear. And the Rebbe said that takes strength of character. The Rebbe also concluded at the time and told him, he says, but also tell him that not everything in the Middle Ages was dark. But the point is, see the view. Most people would become very defensive, start talking about the subject. The Rebbe looked at the individual and said, this is a journalist with a strength of character and willing to share true criticism or true feelings that he has. There might disagree with him that not everything in the Middle Ages was darkness, but found the good in the other individual. Another example that comes to mind is another story where many years ago was very common. There was the cults, there was the missionaries were much, much stronger than today. And the Rebbe instigated and the Rebbe actually encouraged a certain individual who opened up an organization which was against missionaries and anti-missionary and was against all the cult movements that were happening at that time. And the Rebbe specifically told them not to mention that it's a Chabad organization. This way, those people that at the time had some issues with Chabad or would not want to join hands with Chabad would also go on board with this organization. And lo and behold, it was being very successful. And then one of the people that was supporting this organization, one of the Jewish leaders, found out that the Rebbe was behind it and Chabad was behind it. And when he found out, he decided, I'm not going to have anything to do with this. He actually broke away. He opened up a competing organization, which actually drained some of the funds and the supporters of this organization to his new organization. The person that managed it, the executive director at the time, was not a Chabad individual, but he met with the Rebbe and he was very, very frustrated by this. How can this rabbi or leader or Jewish leader do such a thing? Why can't we all, let petty politics or whatever else get in the way of such a situation? And, he was really frustrated and he told the Rebbe all about this. So the Rebbe said to him, he says like this. He says that there's actually, the Talmud tells us that when it came to giving witnesses or being on the court, who decided leap years, the king and the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, couldn't be on the court. And the reason was, whether conscious or subconscious, they have a bias. You see, the king used to pay their workers on the year. It was an annual salary. So subconsciously, he would want to get an extra month of free labor. The high priest had to enter the Holy of Holies, and he had to go in barefoot, and he would have to immerse in a mikveh many times during the day of Yom Kippur, where there wasn't modern heating for the water. So conscious or subconscious, he would want Yom Kippur to be closer to the warm months of the year. And because of that, people have a natural bias which impacts them in ways that they don't even know. And the Rebbe said that this individual explained he came post-Holocaust, he lost a lot, in the old country. He came here, he's trying to reestablish a yeshiva, and he's dependent on funding from people that might not support Chabad. And therefore, this is all he has. He felt if he's going to be sort of in the same boat with Chabad at the time, he will lose his support. Well, this is all he has, and he's trying to establish his yeshiva. the first individual, the executive director, couldn't understand how a person could be so negative. The Rebbe saw it, that he's trying to establish his yeshiva, and this is the only way he knows how to do that. So it's, again, this is what's called a good eye, seeing the good in every individual and in every situation. I just want to conclude with a final point, which is that how we see others actually impacts the way others become. The way we see them actually impacts who they are and what they become. And just to conclude with a quick story, which also recently came to the fore, and it was shared by this individual. His name is Shelley Bear, and he says that when he was a young boy of 10 years old, he was a troublemaker. And he got kicked out from one yeshiva to another yeshiva. He was in a yeshiva called Chafetz Chaim, and he got kicked out. And lo and behold, his mother, at a loss of what to do, met with the Rebbe and took her 10-year-old son with her. She cried her heart out to the Rebbe lamenting about her son. And the Rebbe called over the son. He said, he says, come here. And he says, I was a rebellious 10-year-old and I was ready for this one. And I knew I had all the answers. And the Rebbe called him. He says to him, are you a good boy? And he goes, no. He says, do you like school? He goes, no. He was ready for the fight. And he says, do you listen to your mother when she talks to you? And I request things for you? He goes, no. And the Rebbe looks at him and looks at his mother and says, wow, emes, truth. When a child is honest, that's such a positive and good character. And this child is saying only the truth. He says that one sentence turned his life around. When the Rebbe was able to, with warmth, rather than rebuke him about all the negativity, the Rebbe found a virtue in him, that he is truthful, and he felt the warmth that the Rebbe had and found a good character within him. Literally, he says, that turned him around. Who he is today, he says, is thanks to that one sentence. So again, let us hope, really, I think in a practical sense, what can we do about this? Let us think of somebody perhaps that we might be having a hard time with. And we have to think about, how are they bothering us? What is it that they're doing that bothers us or disturbs us? And we have to see whether it's possible that there's some reason why they are acting in this particular way. And is it possible for us perhaps to see past their facade or arrogance or self-absorption and look into the real essence, the wholesome essence of why this person might be be in need of nurturing and perhaps a little tender care. And finally, let us remember that if you change the way we look at another person, that will cause the person to change their character and behavior as well. And just to conclude with, it says that God treats us midah keneged midah, measure for measure. The character that we have towards other people, that's how God looks towards us. So let us hope that we should be able to train ourselves to have a good eye, and let us merit in return that God should look at us with a good eye and see beyond perhaps the surface of who and what we are in our past, and see who we are and how we have a good eye. And God should treat us always with the best good eye, with only blessings and good things in our life, both physically and spiritually. And let us hope that very quickly God shall look at the world with a good eye, and we should be able to end this current stay-at-home status, and we should be able to all, hopefully even before Shavuos, be able to figure out a way that we should be able to all come together and see only goodness in a revealed way in our life. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom. I look forward to seeing you all very soon.